Hello and welcome back to our next science lesson. So we're going to continue to think about materials and their properties, but today we're going to try and use some of the knowledge that we've gained from science and some of the knowledge we've gained from history together. So what we're going to do is we are going to see if we can choose appropriate materials based on their properties. So thinking back to what we've done before, thinking about the properties that we've looked at and those that we've mentioned, and seeing if we can use those ideas to help choose a material for good reasons. So can I? Can I recognize materials that were available for the Vikings? Can I identify the properties of various materials? And can I decide which material is best for the particular job? So there's a few stages to this. The first is trying to recognize materials. So looking at what might have been available to them, not what we have available to us now, but what might have been available to them, what different materials. And then once we've identified those materials, we need to think about what properties they might have that would have been useful for the Vikings at that time. And then finally, you're choosing the material, the properties that are best suited for a job that you are deciding to use that material for. So, during our topic, we've considered different properties of materials. We have tested strength to see how strong something is. We looked at that paper. Water resistant, so whether or not a material can withstand water. Absorbency, how much water something will soak up. Thermal insulation, how well something keeps heat in. So you're getting better at science at least. But we also discussed other properties alongside those, and some we talked about alongside them, others we talked about slightly separately. So we thought of things like hard and soft, rough and smooth, rigid and flexible, which is you can either bend it or you can't. Transparent, you can see through it. Translucent, you get an idea of what's through it. So you can't quite see completely through it, but you do get light through it. Or opaque, nothing goes through it. And there are more indeed. So in various locations, the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings would have settled. There would have been limited materials, and the materials depended on the place in which they settled. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at a few images. And whilst you're looking at them, and we'll take it apart in a minute, I want you just to think, what's in the image? What can we see? What might we be able to use as a material? So the first one is a woodland, and then a coastline, and a field, and then some animals that would have been around in nature around them. So your first task is you're going to look at each of the images and you're going to try and identify two materials that would be used or could be used to make other things. So you're looking for 8 in total, 2 from each of the images. So have a look at this one, pause now and see what you can see in the picture that might be able to be used. Our second one is a coastline. Again, pause now, have a look to see what might be there. Then we have the river bank and field. What might be in this picture that you could use for making other things? And finally, an interesting one, the native animals. What, knowing these animals, could you use to make other things? Think carefully about this one. Pause now. Okay. So after having done that, you should have a list of materials that would have been available to Vikings had they settled in England. So, although your home may look different from this, there are many features which actually are in common across the houses. And you think about you've got clay tiles for sloping roofs quite often, you have glass windows, you have brick walls, and plastic drain pipes. Now, each of these materials are common to houses across England, and there's a reason for this. Each of these materials were chosen particularly for the properties they possess, as well as the cost that they have. And this is something that obviously the Vikings wouldn't necessarily have to worry about the cost, but rather than cost, it's availability for them. We don't necessarily have a problem with availability, but what we do have is a problem with cost. So it's similar in that regard. So the reason why clay tiles and sloping roofs would have been chosen, have a think. Why do you think? Why would we choose glass windows or brick walls and plastic drain pipes? What's the reason? Well, the clay tiles are water resistant, so water runs off of them and doesn't go into the house, and therefore you gain shelter from water, the rain, and such like. We have glass windows because they're transparent, we can see through them. But not only that, they're also water resistant, which means again, we are not letting water into our house. We have brick walls. They're strong. They can take a lot of weight. If you think about the brick right at the very bottom of your house, it has a lot of weight on top of it, and it still maintains its integrity. It's still a brick. It's also water resistant, so it does keep water out. There's a trend here that you can see, I think. And then we've got plastic drain pipes. And yes, they're water resistant, but they're also cheap and easy to shape, which means that to do a job of a drain pipe, you have to be able to go around the outside of the roof, which means you have to be able to be shaped in a way that allows you to follow the path of the outside of the roof. Not only that, you have to be shaped into a particular shape in order to catch the rainfall and to have pipes coming down from it and connectors to other pipes. And this is a really good thing about plastic. And that's the reason why plastic was so used for lots of things. And it's cheap to make and manufacture. So builders, whoever they are, you can use any materials that they like, but they can only use materials that are available to them. And that's a massive stepping stone. If you think back to old buildings that you might have seen, a lot of them will have used natural materials like stone and brick because they are available to the builder at the time. They also need to look at the properties of those materials, and they need to make the best choice based on the property that that material has. You probably weren't going to create the side of your house out of gingerbread and chocolate because, well, as soon as it rained, it will go soggy and break. Or if it got hot, the chocolate would melt and everything would fall apart. Not a good building material. So you'd have to choose something which was going to withstand certain elements and the heat and cold, which most houses will have to work with. But what if your materials are very limited and you only have very few to work with? Well, earlier we talked about what materials the Vikings may have had available to them, as well as the Anglo-Saxons. When they were first in Britain, uh, they had only that they could see and use in the land of which they lived on. They couldn't go down to B&Q and buy whatever they liked in order to find it. No, there was no B&Q, surprisingly enough, in the Viking and Anglo-Saxon time. So they had to use what they had available to them. Now, earlier in this unit, you've already helped your people find a location for your settlement. Now, you need to design a home for them. So, your second task, you are going to draw a clear picture or diagram of a house you're going to build. You are going to clearly label all the materials that you are using to build that house, thinking about the materials that you have available to you from those images. You're going to list the properties and explain why you chose that material. Not only just what the property is, but why that would be useful in that part of the house. So, on the next slide is going to be an example. You don't have to use this as your base. You can do whatever you like, but this is just an idea for you. So my house design. So drawn a idea of what my house might look like at the time, thinking about what might be available to you. And the first material that I'm going to use is a tree trunk from the woodland. And I'm going to choose it because it is strong and relatively straight, and it will make a good frame for the house for the rest of the house to be built around. Now, this is how you might explain each of your different materials as you go along, thinking about each one as you choose and explaining why you're using it and what the material is. Obviously, you'll need more than one material if you're going to build a house. You can't build the entirety house out of tree trunks, obviously. I look forward to seeing your ideas up on Tapestry. Good luck, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.